Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. This is the HCD webinar series. Today, we're going to be doing What the Health, which is all about consumer research in the wellness market. And today, we have a special guest with us, which will be Martha Bajek. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. There's still some people joining, but we're going to go ahead and start the intro at the very least. So first of all, everybody, welcome to the webinar. So today, just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. My name is Michelle Murphy-Nagella, PhD in Behavioral Neuroscience and VP of Research and Innovation at HCD Research. I'm joined today by Martha Bajek, who is our Consulting Director of Health and Wellness here at HCD, a new position that we created as we've gotten more and more business in this area. We always find it's important to have expertise. And so we are really happy to have Martha join us. She is a PhD, and she has spent the last decade working as a scientist and leader for some of the world's largest and most influential consumer packaged goods companies. Her undergraduate and master's really focused on neurotransmission in model organisms, and then her doctoral work focused on individual differences in humans for oral perception and sensation. Martha has put all sorts of really hard work in delivering evidence-based insights for CPG categories that range from fortified milk-based products all the way through carbonated beverages, beer, wine, and even tobacco and cannabis, the sin products that we all kind of talk about. Currently, she's also working, in addition to her role at HCD, she also runs her own consulting company called Bajek SenseWorks. She lends her expertise, her unique perspective, to help researchers and leaders across all sorts of CPG categories. In addition to her full service report, she helps out with human testing and product evaluation and innovation in really tightly regulated spaces and complicated areas. So a particular expertise in these sort of more difficult research questions and difficult consumer research situations. So just to give a little bit of housekeeping as well, today we're going to start with some introductions here, and then we're going to launch into what exactly is the health and wellness space, the different types of complexities in the field, methods for how you go about doing consumer research in the field. And then we're going to talk about an example of health and wellness and what brings in that complexity. We're also going to touch on some best practices and sort of guidelines to help people that are sort of just getting into this space, because it is very complicated and does take a lot of thoughtfulness in how to approach it correctly. Please feel free to enter any questions either into the Q&A tab or via the chat, as you can see on the Zoom dashboard. We will address those at the end and may even try to answer some during that. Cara Silvestri, part of the HCD team, will be fielding those questions. So throughout this talk, please feel free to enter those questions at any time, and we'll see what we can do to answer them all. So we want this to be interactive, so please feel free to any comments or questions to just add them in. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start into the webinar today by talking a little bit about who HCD is. So we are a full service market research house. We started out doing traditional market research in qual and quant, and have since these past 15 years or so using applied consumer neuroscience. We use all these approaches, the traditional as well as the applied consumer neuroscience, to look at how consumers perceive, evaluate, and respond to different types of stimuli. And that could be anything from looking at consumer products or the ingredients that go into the products, the packaging, and communications that you use to market the products for consumers. We do our work globally. It can be done online or in person. There are certain in-person ones that have to be done if you're using any physiological measures and neuroscience measures. But the applied consumer neuroscience approach really involves anything from using neuroscience and physiology to different statistical approaches and psychological methodologies. We apply these all across the gamut of what you might be studying, from early stages of product development all the way through the end stages of validating a product or marketing and communications. So launching right into this, we call this webinar "What the Health," because this is a really complicated space, and wellness itself is really considered an active process of becoming aware of and making choices towards a healthy and fulfilling life. So those choices can involve all sorts of things that range from choosing to take the stairs, or choosing the type of food that you eat, choosing how you're going to organize your doctor's visits, preventative measures, eating healthier, taking supplements, or other sort of things that you might have in your home that really aid to this more healthy lifestyle. So it really is all about making these choices, whether they're consumer decisions or just lifestyle behavioral decisions. And when we think about that, and we think about that consumer, the wellness focused consumer is consciously sort of taking control of their health and well-being in order to create an optimal way to live that is best for their needs. So that landscape of consumer health and nutrition does rapidly shift, right? So consumers are looking to make changes, maybe to their health care, but their overall health. So constantly changing health trends really can drive that, and large amounts of data that they're sort of impacted with. And all the information on health and nutrition tend to blur the lines of what types of products consumers are using to maintain their health. Consumers are shifting their focus towards a more holistic approach to healthcare, and brands and companies do need to ensure that they are looking at their products and services with the same sort of healthy view. So, on the one hand, rising healthcare costs and growing consumer focus towards healthy lifestyle, plus a proactive nutritional approach in order to avoid chronic diseases, or preventative sort of health approaches, things like that, do tend to drive the market in this space. But on the other hand, consumers are also growing more conscious of the health and the environmental consequences that all sorts of products which they consume are having on them. And that's also driving the wellness movement. Now, a health and wellness product will mean very different things to different people. So, whatever the reason is for using complementary or natural health remedies, herbal health, or any other alternative care health services or products, the common goal is to achieve and optimize health and well-being. So when you're thinking about sort of the driving forces behind that, a first one would be a growing focus on mental well-being and self-care. So consumers are making active changes in their daily behaviors with an aim to lead a more balanced lifestyle and maintain a better mental health. Mental well-being can encompass several areas, whether it's feeling more relaxed, calm, confident, or self-assured. But importantly, consumers are looking to spend time on themselves. There has been a rise in global consumers taking yoga, participating in meditation, demanding flexible work hours in order to maintain a good work-life balance, and spending time more on hobbies, friends, and family, as well as placing more importance on their sleep. And all these things can be reflected in the type of consumer products that they interact with. Now, there's also another driving force of the rise of stress and anxiety in our lives, particularly in this time of COVID-19, but also the rise of social media. So that fast on-the-go lifestyle, alongside all sorts of fluctuating political and environmental landscapes, have greatly influenced and increased the amount of stress and anxiety that we're all under, and particularly that consumers feel daily. Though many consumers are focused on work-life balance and the importance of all this mental well-being, and that continues to grow, stress and anxiety remain an issue for a large part of the population. So a lot of the health and wellness products that are out there do seem to start to address this, whether it's, a skincare product that talks about, giving you these relaxing feelings, or maybe, a tincture, or, a gummy, or anything like this, that it kind of promises a lot of this well-being part. Now, there's also other types of products that, lend to this. So, when you think about health and well-being in the natural space, a lot of people start to think of, those things like having a CBD tincture, or maybe taking supplements. But you can also have caffeine added to shampoo, or you can have weighted blankets, or maybe a jade cosmetic roller. All these sort of things really do play in to this idea of self-care and health and wellness, that so really thinking about what the consumer pictures of health and wellness might not be exactly what marketers are thinking, or even people in the health and wellness space. They're also seeking things like having a balanced diet. So consumers seem to be seeking more traditional ways of eating, and really focusing on, balanced meals, low sugar, low carbohydrates, low calories, high protein, all sorts of things are really going on here. And really thinking about how things like organic and fair trade really add to that overall sense of well-being. Other ideas that I think we want to make sure we touch on that are driving forces is that it's also maintaining fitness through nutrition. So making sure that it's not just about exercise, but something, also that's preventative is really thinking about, their own self-image and how consumers who live an active lifestyle often seek sports nutrition products that answer, emphasize their exercise habits. So when we think about that caffeine shampoo, that might be part of that whole idea of like sports nutrition, even though it's not nutrition that they're taking in with their food, but having, in addition to electrolyte drinks and hydrated drinks or protein and energy bars, there's other types of things that people might be consuming to sort of add to that lifestyle. And a lot of this has to do with another driving factor, which is prevention rather than treatment. The overall movement towards a healthy, wellness, balanced lifestyle involves focusing on healthcare with a more holistic view that is rooted in the idea that making these changes can somehow prevent illnesses and ailments in the future. So your future self and future self-care. So consumers are looking to make sacrifices and take those additional measures within exercise, mental well-being, and diet right now, rather than seeking treatment for issues at a later stage. And a lot of this, does bring in this idea of nutraceuticals and herbaceuticals, which really is a, both broad umbrella terms that are used to describe any product derived from, some sort of herbal or food source that has extra health benefits in addition to just the basic nutritional value or basic functional value that are found in the products. Now, when we think about this space, it gets very complicated. There are many challenges facing companies interested in this space and the broader, health and nutrition and wellness industry. The first and most obvious challenge is developing a viable product with a background that has scientific evidence and product efficacy. And that's not even to mention that you need to have really strong and excellent branding, positioning, and packaging, and ensure good taste and good experience, or consumer comfort when people are using it. And this bar has been raised even higher on scientific evidence in these past 5 to 10 years, where companies need, consumers need to have a basic understanding of the ingredients involved. And people who sell these products need more than just, the typical studies that they've done in the past. People are expecting a lot more when it comes to making claims in a general and nature. So, while this might be seen as more in like the marketing sort of category, wellness targets at niche markets of consumers with specific health needs and disease prevention goals. The consumer's intent in using a product determines which regulatory category the FDA will place it in and what requirements and restrictions apply to that labeling. So inherent in the definition and regulation of this emerging product category are several core paradoxes that really complicate everything. Because wellness products include so many products that are consumed for so many purposes, they do tend to elude easy classification under current laws that regulate drugs, foods, and other more specific categories that have dietary and medical uses. So it ends up being this really vague and difficult situation to be in. And this elusiveness creates both opportunity for people to create new products, but also confusion for companies who are looking to develop products to sort of take advantage of the wellness movement. Companies marketing products in this really dynamic area and this ill-defined category are selling to consumers who don't actually distinguish between prevention of disease from treatment of disease, right? So, or at least not as sharply as the FDA does, and that really brings in a lot of complications when you're really trying to make this product and market this product. So companies developing wellness products to meet the consumer demand must reconcile the consumer's goals, which are often expressed in terms of preventing or managing or treating disease. They have to balance that with the FDA's approach that product use for any diagnosis or cure, to mitigate or treat any human disease is a drug, right? So therefore it does have to be regulated and restricted more than your typical food, dietary supplement, or consumer product. Now, most nutraceuticals and herbaceuticals are marketed under one of the three regulatory categories of maybe dietary supplements or food for special dietary uses, medical foods. And so placement in these categories may require manufacturers to be in compliance with FDA requirements. And the overall discussion of all of this related to disease is basically the fact that many consumers look not just to prevent or cure, but general well-being as well, their energy levels and thinking about longevity. So as more companies pursue new or extended markets with familiar products, looking to reposition their current products or supporting with some research, they really have to take all of this into mind. So some examples where this has been done very broadly and more generally that doesn't require all these different concerns might be where you have pasta that has added protein. It gives you this sort of wellness idea that your product has additional health benefits outside of just being pasta. Or again, that shampoo that has the added caffeine, it's being a shampoo, but it also has this added benefit of maybe being more awakening. But we do have to think about how to go about studying that, because if we are making an actual claim, or even just thinking what passes for regulatory, can be very variable. So you have to take, some definite concern. Clinical studies may not always be necessary when you're just repositioning a product in this wellness space. So if you're just repositioning your pasta to be, higher protein and therefore greater wellness, you may not require, obviously a clinical study. But does end up being a little bit cloudy. So if you think back to like milk, for example, and the milk mustache, that campaign took a commodity product that had been getting bad press, for maybe, being fattening or something like that, and losing a market. They took and they repositioned it, emphasizing different values to different consumers. So now having this milk mustache, having it be like a health halo, and the campaign created a new image based on milk as a nutritional vehicle, and helping to segment the market a little better there. So without further ado, I want to launch into how you go about measuring it. So use all the traditional ways that you would, only now when you're thinking about how the product is really being used, that can sort of regulate or guide you on what sort of additional regulations and guidelines you might have to have. So on the left here, the more traditional approaches that we at HCD use, that could be focus groups and surveys and maybe some physiological or psychological tests. When you start looking at foods and maybe even potentially supplements, then you start getting into, are you going to need clinical regulation, be it a CRO? Is it cosmetics that are going to require some sort of clinical efficacy test? Is it need to be in a location that has better food regulation, or GMP? These sort of things that we have to take into account. So when we approach that sort of situation, I'm going to pass it over to Martha, who's going to talk a little bit more about these specifics, and really dive deeper into all these complexities and give you a better example of how that really plays out. So without further ado, here is Martha.
Hi, thanks, Michelle, so much. I'm really excited, as always, to talk to my friends at HCD, and always excited to talk about wellness and especially cannabis. Oh, sorry, Michelle. I think I need control of the. There we go. Cool. Thank you. So, what is cannabis? Let's start at the beginning. Michelle very succinctly and completely discussed the complexity around testing and health and wellness, and what those things mean. So we thought we would use one of my favorite ingredients, plants, whatever we want to call it, cannabis, to discuss that complexity, especially since recently cannabis for all purposes has become legal in Canada, the US. There are a lot of states that are changing the way that they think about cannabis. So what is it? What's the big deal? What are we using? What are we talking about? What's going on? So right off the bat, you start, okay, well, there's THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and then there's CBD, cannabidiol. So we'll use the short forms through this because that's what's out in all the media. Typically you see THC and CBD. So just starting on the complexity, what's that? Well, THC and CBD are compounds, cannabinoids, and they exist in both cannabis and hemp. So then the question comes, well, what's the difference between cannabis and hemp? Well, we'll get there. Oop, sorry about that. So then everyone's heard the indica and sativa. Well, what are those? What are the differences there? Well, by genetics, they're the same plant. So that makes it even more confusing because we thought, oh, well, sativas, they make you active, energetic, get up and clean the house, that kind of feeling. Where indica, I heard somebody once say, indica is indica couch. So it's that sort of wheelchair weed locked in, not doing anything on this. Okay, so there's that to take into account. Do you get all of that with both THC and CBD? Well, this is all part of the same question. There we go. So then when we talk about indica and sativa, what are the main differences there? What are we thinking about? We're thinking about terpenes. What are terpenes? They, in the media and in the cannabis sort of literature, terpenes have taken on sort of a magical halo, and really they're flavor compounds. They're flavor compounds that have additional attributes, basically, you can think of. Then when we talk about terpenes, there's this entourage effect that gets thrown around a lot. So what's that? Well, kind of everything in the plant works together to give you the outcome of that specific strain, cultivar, whatever you want to call it, since that language is also still very ambiguous. Some people call it a strain, some people will call it a cultivar. You got to ask for clarification. Then when you start talking about terpenes, well, these things are chemical compounds, they're volatile. So at different temperatures, you burn off different terpenes. So then should you smoke or vape? Well, those are two very different media by which to consume your cannabis. So that's a big question too. And then when you get into the question of vaping, what are you vaping? Concentrates, dry flower, all kinds of stuff. So really, when somebody says we want to get into cannabis, you kind of have to ask, what are you talking about? Because there's so many pieces of it that go together. Then if there's, you get into discussing potential issues with vaping and smoking as well. Obviously, smoking, you're inhaling a combustion product, not the best thing to do ever, inhale combustion products of anything. Vaping, well, okay, but we've seen so much media around, especially in 2019, around people getting very, very sick when they vaped what ended up being apparently adulterated products. So let's just work on edibles then. Well, edibles raises all kinds of questions in and of itself. There's differences in metabolism and onset, all kinds of issues there too. And what kind of food are you going to put it in? That makes a difference as well in how you metabolize it. So then, because cannabis and sort of medical marijuana, legal weed has all been in the media so much over the last few years, people assume that everything having to do with it is safe. And that's a big question. It's safe? Well, it depends. And of course, that's the answer that no one ever loves to get. But it depends. You can get very gastrointestinally uncomfortable and sort of cognitively not okay feeling if you ingest too much THC orally through like consumption, eating or drinking. It can make you feel not great. Anyone who's done that knows exactly. There we go. And then the question, it's all legal now, right? We're good. We should be okay. Well, no, not really. Globally, you can see in gray countries where it's not okay. Don't take your CBD there. And And then countries where there's some sort of blue, yellow, there's either legal for different purposes, legal for all purposes, or, it depends. And the US is very much a depends sort of thing. So if we kind of focus in on where we're interested, which is North America mostly. There we go. So Canada and the US, why is the US orange and Canada blue? Canada has legalized cannabis for all purposes, recreational and medical. And the only sort of thing you have to worry about is what's the legal age where, what's legal to sell, what format sort of thing. So, there's still a lot of regulation around what kind of extracts you can use if you're making concentrates, what kind of solvents you can use if you're making concentrates and extracts. So we still have a lot of regulation, a lot of laws that can be very confusing too. But we are legal in Canada federally, and then the management of that is put on the provinces. In the US, we have sort of the opposite happening. So just to sort of zoom in here, it depends and it's complicated. Canada, so we've just kind of covered that with green. Where the US, things are more on a state-by-state basis. So each state has its own laws around cannabis, but federally it's still illegal. Well, illegal, yes. I'll stop there. I won't say anything further. Federally, it's illegal. Which obviously, if you're running a research program, you have concerns about. How do you manage money coming from the sale of cannabis or cannabis products? How do you market cross states? All of these things are really key to think about before buying into cannabis or potentially hemp, as we'll talk about too. So there's a lot of background that you have to get up to if you're wanting to get into cannabis in either Canada or the US. Canada has basically regulations for everything, almost, where the US, things are ill-defined, should we say, and then states are managing themselves. But keeping in mind that federally, it's still not okay. Okay, so yeah, complicated and depends. So state by state, know your regulations. That's your safest bet. Federally, THC is still a no-no. Now, CBD is a little bit more complicated, of course, because that's what cannabis is. We have CBD that comes from cannabis, which is technically not okay. But CBD that comes from hemp is sort of mostly okay. Again, every state, you have to check the regulations. The US Farm Bill, there's a lot of background on how to manage both using these compounds in products and even just handling the raw materials. Obviously, there's a lot of concern around that. So then the question usually comes, well, okay, let's just use hemp. What's hemp? Hemp is cannabis. So there's an extra layer of confusion for most people, but hemp, any flowering part of hemp, of a cannabis plant used as hemp or designated hemp, has to have less than 0.3% THC. So this is something where every country has their own regulations, both for growing, processing, and using cannabinoids in formulations. So all of it is really complex. And then when you think about, ultimately, I'm trying to do research with this, some type of consumer related research. So people are going to have to consume it, smoke it, eat it, put it on their skin, something. And of course, if you're putting these ingredients into products, they might be ingredients. If you're putting these into products, you want to make sure they're tasting the way they should taste or smelling the way they should smell. That they're producing the kind of outcome, whether from intoxication, relaxation, whatever perspective, and that they're safe. So then the question from all this, especially in the US, because the situation is ambiguous, you really do have to think about the ethics of your research. Some people will say hard and fast, you have to go clinical research with anything related to cannabis, that you have to go through a institutional ethics review board, that you have to have objective sort of biochemical measures of use or intoxication. And then others will say, just go the consumer research route and just don't, make sure you do safety checks and keep everything organized and you're fine to do normal panel consumer work. The way that you need to approach this is whether you're considering it a drug or an ingredient. And in the US, you got wiggle room, depending on the state. In Canada, they're really defining these things for us. So you can do different types of research, and the level of restriction or oversight depends on the outcomes that you're measuring. So it's a very different, but you have to be licensed to do the research. So, and that comes from Health Canada, very important. So all of these things, you have to figure out how you're gonna work this research, what this cannabinoid component is in terms of how you're going to market these products. Is it ingredient or drug? And ultimately, where that all comes out in the wash is how much time and or money you can spend on this. Because a clinical study can cost you upwards of $500,000, where for the consumer research, perhaps the same study is $60,000. And don't quote me on those. That's not to suggest that HCD would do studies for that or less or more. So what about making claims? Michelle touched on, yeah, of course, you want to, if these are health and wellness products, you want to be able to say this product will help you relax or will help you fall asleep or stay asleep or help you feel more satisfied after meals, whatever kind of claim you can imagine. People either want to or are making about cannabinoid containing products. And I think here the best thing to do is point at the US FDA. There is ambiguity. There is a lot of haze around, so pun not intended, haze around how to manage these things and what to do. But the couple of key points that I wanted to make from the FDA is that it's currently illegal to market CBD by adding it to a food or labeling it as a dietary supplement. And that's similar to other dietary supplements, nutritional supplements that we see. And also that CBD products are being marketed with unproven medical claims. And that's where things get messy, because relaxation, sleeping, appetite control, mood modulation, all of these sort of things that we try to optimize ourselves with. Even if you're talking about relaxation, these things are states of physiology and of sort of mind. So they are medical on the sort of one end, and then also a holistic well-being program has these kinds of things included. So they're really, the take home on cannabis is be careful and know your up-to-date regs. Have somebody that understands them and that can walk you through what you can do, what you can't do, because this is an area, and I think it's an area like this because of how new it is and because of how, reefer madness has been for so long, that there's not a lot of saying sorry. So this is I feel, especially in Canada, and more so now, I think starting in the US, that there's not so much wiggle room being afforded, that you can just kind of do whatever you want. It's not the Wild West as much as it was. So really think about what you're doing. And because of this health and wellness halo, there's often, well, it's weed, it can't hurt you, or oh, it's just an extract from cannabis, it's not going to hurt you. There are potential side effects. You have to be careful. If you're on a medication where you can't eat grapefruit, you probably shouldn't use CBD either. So all of these kinds of things, and just this little bit on, potential harm and side effects. You don't know how it interacts with other medications. There's all of this. It might just be an ingredient, but at the same time, you have to think of it as a drug, because it is. So caution, caution, caution. That's my complexity wrap up. And almost any question is going to start with, it's complicated and it depends. So that's so just to sort of summarize that with best practices, and I think Michelle, you'll probably have some thoughts to add here too. As I've pounded home, know your legal, regulatory, and ethical obligations. It's a big deal. People are watching, especially governments. Use existing best practices. So there's all kinds of methods and tools and research and people out there that, maybe not working on what you're working on, but similar problems have been encountered before. Reach out, figure out. There's, if you're thinking about inhalable products, there's a lot of research that's been done on those, and don't cut corners. This isn't an area where you want to cheap out. I get it. I like to save money on every possible thing too, but in cannabis, research is one place that shouldn't be the driving factor. Just because you can does not mean you should. I feel like that's just a good life hack. Think about whether you should. Just because you can put CBD everywhere, do you need to? Maybe not. Just a thought. It is expensive too in most countries, so that's another, just because you can doesn't mean you should. A warm body does not a panelist assessor subject make. Users are different. This is something that we understand to some level for every category, for every product. Cannabis is no different. If anything, users are more attuned to cues from their products, right? It's like when you're walking down the street with somebody and you smell the odor that would typically be skunk. Well, somebody who doesn't use cannabis, the first thing they'll say is, oh, there's a skunk here, skunk sprayed. Somebody that does use cannabis will be like, oh, that smells familiar. I wonder, is that my weed smell? So there are differences in the way that we experience, think about, perceive, process cues in the environment. And if you're not using your users, then you don't necessarily get all of the good, rich meat that they can provide to your research. Know your research question. This is for everything, especially in cannabis, because here it's going to determine what kind of study you need, unless that's dictated by your local regulations. Clinical, sensory, consumer, hybrid, these all cost and take different amounts. Know your product up close and personal. Consumers know and care, be honest and transparent. Especially now in times where everyone's sense of danger and trouble is heightened, everyone's on high alert. If something it doesn't jive, doesn't fit right, then remove it. Don't push it. There's a lot of cannabis products. Shelf life with cannabinoids is going to be more important than ever. Not only are you going to lose potential flavor, aroma, whatever, there's degradation of these key compounds with time and with temperature. So if you have an oil sitting on a shelf for 5 years, you're going to need to do analytics on that again, because odds are good that it's not the same oil that you started with. So just a lot there to take home and process. Michelle, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martha. That's like, there's a lot of information there, and I think it really is so much more complicated than people realize. Um, we do have some really good questions that came up with this, but before we launch into those, if you'd like to reach out to either of us, myself, you can reach me on LinkedIn or with my email address. You can also reach out to Martha with any questions that we didn't address in here. But also feel free to enter additional questions into the Q&A portion of the Zoom platform there or in the chat. We do have some questions that have come in. So I just want to bring Kara back into the mix so she can read those questions out to her, and we'll do our best to answer those. Anything we're not able to get to, in the, interest of time management for everybody, we will be able to email you back directly as well. Kara, would you like to go ahead and start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much to the both of you for sharing some really great information so far. So we do have several questions here. I'll start off with the more cannabis directed questions. So one we had here is, are there any questions that you can't explore with consumers when it comes to cannabis products?
Martha, I'm going to let you start with that.
That you can't explore with consumers. I guess you can pretty much explore anything with consumers. It's just what kind of test situation are you going to have them in? I mean, I think it's similar to thinking about alcohol, testing with alcohol, right? You want to make sure you have all of your safety and everything. But if you're doing enzyme tests and stuff like that, then you're going to be doing it in a clinical environment. So it depends. I feel like everything should be done with product users. It's just whether you do it in a really tight environment or sort of our normal booth consumer sampling protocols.
Right. And I think, to that point, I would just add to that you can ask anything, but there's kind of like caveats that come with it, right? So like, you might have to use a clinical CRO sort of situation, which is of course going to cost more, or, maybe bring in more complexities. Who are you going to be able to measure? Healthy adults, for example, versus people that are more, at health risk. Yeah, so I think it kind of depends on the time and money you have to spend, because there's certainly limitations.
Yeah, actually, and just to follow up on that really quickly, Health Canada has been working on different research licenses, and there is a license for doing consumer research, sort of. And there was sort of confusion at first between people applying for among people applying for these licenses, because the question was, what's liking? Is it an emotion or is it sensory? Well, it's everything. So how do we parse those different questions?
Very true.
Thank you. Okay, so next question we have here. We talked a lot about cannabis. It's very big now, but what do you think is next in the wellness space?
Yeah, I mean, people are looking to other illicit drugs, but really the space is kind of wide open. I think you're seeing a lot of the approaches again focusing on that self-care. So really thinking about products that are helping people be more relaxed or sleep better. And the issue ends up being very almost claims based. I don't know if you would agree, Martha, but when you have a shampoo that has caffeine in it, the implication there, or probably the marketing message that people want to include with it, is that it's going to be more awakening. It's going to help you start your day. Or, here's this gummy, it's going to, relieve your stress. It's stress relieving. Here's this candle, right? The scent is, vanilla, and it's supposed to, alleviate, do some sort of mood modulation. And when it comes to mood modulation, how you're communicating that becomes very important, because now are you stepping into that area of claims, which means you're going to have to focus on how to support those claims. And it can be done through, your standard consumer tests. If you look at the ASTM guidelines on claims, then, there are certain things you have to follow on representation and statistical verification of any real effect. But then you also have to think, is it something that I can do in just maybe a qualitative situation, ask a group of people if they feel that they're, more awake, or do we really want to prove it out by, let's wire people up, let's do a sleep study and see if they actually do sleep longer. Do they get more different types of sleep? Are we going to do full on EEG sleep study, or just have people do an in-home study where, we just have them fill out a survey daily, for their sleep habits? We've kind of run the gamut of that at HCD, done all sorts of sides of that, but it really, I think Martha brought this up, that it kind of depends on what the end goal is for your product. What are your thoughts, Martha?
Yeah, I think that's all completely true. And one additional complexity is, so in the States, we typically, but in all countries, we typically use the ASTM guidance for making claims, right? But here with cannabis in Canada, there's no advertising claims. So, that on pack message or the billboard message is not allowed.
So really health halo, right? So you have CBD on it, and then people just sort of assume these other things that go along with it. That's really interesting, because then
Yeah.
the approach, if you're looking at the marketing side, is going to be very, maybe implicitly driven, so trying to see like what those effects are. As far as like, again, thinking about the future of the health and wellness space, I think there's really something to be said for behavior. I think that like Noom is a company that came out, fairly recently, that really focuses on a behavioral approach to self-care and health and wellness, thinking about changing habits, that sort of thing. I think people are looking for, and what else, so again, you think about that pasta. Great, it's pasta, but I want more from it. Now it has to be pasta with added protein, or yeah, my shampoo makes my hair nice and shiny, but I also want it to make me feel more emotionally stable. So people, I think, when we talk about generations, we think about millennials and the Zoom generation, or whatever you want to call these like younger side of the generations. I think that they're expecting more of their products in general. They don't want it to just be pasta. They don't want it to just be a lotion. Now it has to solve some other sort of larger health and wellness, psychological mood modulation sort of question for them.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, another question here was surrounding supplements that make claims of efficacy. We see that all the time, but is it more challenging to make those claims for consumer products?
Yeah, there's a lot of legal around that, right, Martha? I mean, supplements in particular, there were some laws that were odd in the 90s, right? That kind of gave supplements a broad swaths where they can make all sorts of claims. And it almost seems like some of the more consumer products, like maybe foods, et cetera, have a lot more hurdles to go through, where, maybe your supplement that you're getting at Whole Foods doesn't have to prove that it's actually making you feel less stressed. But if you put it on, you know, a shampoo, you might actually have to prove that out, Martha.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, anything in this space where you're putting a claim, you have to, and that's nearly everything, unless it's being driven purely by the halo. Yeah, you have to be careful. That's the key, and country by country now, right? Before we used to say, oh, okay, I'm making this claim in Canada, cool, ASTM, what do I need? And I'm covered. But now that's not the case. So you really have to dig in. What is that message? And, is it sort of marketing fluff, which is going to be evaluated much more rigorously in this space, depending on the country and everything? Or is it something that I need to put money and time and effort behind?
And
Which
sometimes you
then,
can sort of reach that, when we talk about the health halo, sometimes just making your packaging more gritty, or making it look more oatmeal colored will give people the impression that it's healthy, or that it has even oatmeal in it, right? And so now they think it's soothing, it's a soothing lotion just because you've changed the packaging. So, there's like this huge wide way to like get towards health and wellness, that maybe something as simple as sort of tapping into that health halo, or it might actually be creating a product specifically for a purpose.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something we're seeing a lot of um, in CBD, especially in the US. There's all sorts of new ideas of where to put these things. So I don't think there's going to be any shortage in the years to come.
Great. And I'm just gonna wrap it up with one last question, just kind of overarching. What would you say are the biggest challenges in making claims for wellness products?
I mean, legal, the biggest hurdle.
Mhm.
And I think there's something I think that we don't often think about when we talk about this space. We're so concerned with the ASTM guidelines and the legality of things, that we should take a step back and maybe think of the consumer needs. I think Martha mentioned at one point, do we even need that? Do we need, the shampoo to be waking us up with caffeine? I don't know. But it is really important maybe to take a tap into that and see, is there a real consumer space there? Is there believability in this sort of claim? Do people really believe that, this particular product is going to even do that? So even if you could prove it out scientifically or just try to rely on the halo, is it something that they're going to buy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and goes back to the, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Does it need to be everywhere? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but really look at where you're filling pain points. Where does the consumer need something? If we're just going to put it in every consumable product, well, what are we really sort of communicating that the benefit is if it's just smeared into everything?
Right.
Um, yeah, I think the health and wellness space claims should be more regulated, because we are putting our literal well-being into these products'
Mhm.
hands, right? So I mean, I know for myself, if you're telling me you alleviate pain, it better be somehow there better be a good study behind it, because that's
Yeah.
that's a
You're
big
going to use it
deal,
on
right?
yourself and your family, right?
Yeah, it's more than just like tastes great and
Hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's what the downstream effect is, and people are relying on those things.
Yeah.
So
But I think
caution.
ultimately, in that we just have to concentrate on doing the best research we can, right? So using validated measures, really thinking about the research questions, all these things that we always say for everything. Keep all that in mind. You do want everything. You want the physiological measures. You want the self-reported experience. And I think ultimately you do have to validate it, in home versus in lab, because I do think that there's some importance there, that difference. You might have to do that clinical study potentially, but you also need to verify it in a commercial sense as well.
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah. Well,
Well, that wraps it up for the questions.
thank you so much. And again, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm so happy everybody was able to join. Please tweet with us, visit our blog where we write up a bunch of this stuff. We have, a bunch of white papers on a lot of the different measures that we use, as well as some of these more specific topics. So we'd love to continue this conversation, and we'll be reaching out to those of you whose questions we weren't able to get to right away. Now, additionally, HCD has a lot of other things going on. So if you are interested in seeing more, please visit the website. But we are also potentially going to, I believe we're going to be on TV later this week with some measures that we're doing for the debate. So we're doing some political neuroscience work. So if you're interested, check out NBC or MSNBC to see what's going on there with some measures we're doing on voters that are watching the debates. So anyway, thank you so much for joining, and I hope everybody had a great time, and we'll see you for the next webinar. Thanks so much.